Why was Nora Whitfield's trunk sitting by the door after she had helped save the very ranch that had finally begun to feel like home? Snow snapped beneath boots as Nora gripped the wagon rail, her packed trunk behind her, and cold wind burning her cheeks. Andrew McKenna stood motionless at the ranch gate, all 6'7" of him, unable to say the words she had waited months to hear. Then he stepped forward, and Nora froze. "Stay with us, and tell us what you would do." The stagecoach rolled into Copper Creek beneath a hard August sun, carrying Nora Whitfield toward a job she had already begun counting on. She saw the town through a veil of road dust. A feed store stood beside a blacksmith shop with both doors thrown open to the heat. Horses crowded a hitching rail outside the saloon. Farther down the street, beyond the last rooftops, the land rose toward the blue-gray shoulders of the Bighorn Mountains. The driver stopped in front of the Copper Creek Hotel. Nora climbed down carefully. She was 30 years old, broad through the hips and waist, with a full, heavy figure no dark dress could disguise. Her brown traveling skirt was dusty at the hem. Her boots were worn, and the cuffs of her cream blouse had been mended twice. Her trunk landed beside her with a thump. Nora took a folded letter from her handbag and looked at the painted hotel sign. Copper Creek Hotel. Martin Sutter, proprietor. She had traveled too far for those words not to mean something. A man in a striped vest came through the hotel doors. "Miss Whitfield?" Nora straightened. "Yes. I'm Martin Sutter." She offered him the letter. He didn't take it. His eyes had already traveled from her face to her shoulders, down her body, and back again. Something in his expression changed. Nora knew that look. She had seen it in boarding houses, kitchens, shops, and railway depots. Sometimes pity came first, sometimes amusement. Sutter chose amusement. "You're the cook? I've worked boarding house kitchens for 11 years. I was expecting somebody different. The letter says you need someone who can handle breakfast and supper for 30 guests." A few men near the hotel porch had begun listening. Sutter rubbed his jaw. "30 when we're full? I can handle 30. One of the cattlemen snorted. Sutter glanced toward him, then back at Nora. "Problem is, Miss Whitfield, I hired somebody to cook my provisions." He paused. "Not consume them." The laughter came quickly. 3 men on the porch, another near the hitching rail. Nora's fingers tightened around the letter. For one terrible second, she wanted to explain herself. Tell them how many kitchens she had run, how she could turn 50 pounds of flour into meals that lasted longer than most cooks could manage 60. How she knew precisely how much coffee working men drank after 12 hours outdoors. She said none of it. People who laughed before hearing you rarely became wiser after an explanation. Sutter shrugged. "No offense intended." "Of course not." Her voice stayed level. "Then we'll discuss my return fare." His eyebrows rose. "Your what?" "You hired me in writing. I traveled here because of that letter. I offered employment. I didn't promise transportation." Nora stared at him. The laughter had stopped. That somehow made it worse. Then a deep voice came from behind the men. "What does her size have to do with whether she can feed working men?" Everyone turned. Nora had noticed the stranger earlier without meaning to. He was difficult not to notice. He stood several inches above every other man on the porch, perhaps 6'7", with shoulders that made his faded work shirt pull tight across his back. His hat had lost its original shape years ago. Dust covered his boots almost to the ankle, and a leather glove protruded from one pocket. His face wasn't handsome in the polished way shown on advertisements. It was too weathered for that. Strong nose, dark hair showing beneath his hat, lines around gray eyes that seemed to come from squinting into distance rather than smiling. Martin Sutter gave a short laugh. "Didn't say she couldn't cook, McKenna. You haven't let her near a stove. I know what works in my establishment." The giant cowboy looked at Nora. Not down her body, at her face. Then he looked back at Sutter. "Seems to me you know what gets a laugh on your porch." Nobody laughed this time. Sutter's cheeks darkened. "You looking for a cook, Andrew?" "No." "Then mind your cattle." Andrew McKenna stepped off the porch. "I was planning to." He crossed to a bay gelding, untied the reins, mounted, and rode away without another word. Nora watched him disappear past the blacksmith shop. For half a heartbeat, she had thought. She stopped herself. Thought what? That a stranger would solve her problems because he'd spoken one decent sentence? Life had cured her of expecting that. She folded Sutter's letter along its old crease. "Good day, Mr. Sutter." Then she picked up the handle of her trunk and dragged it toward the freight office. By late afternoon, Copper Creek had become hotter. The freight agent examined the coins Nora placed on his counter. "That won't get you to Cheyenne. How far will it get me?" He counted again. "Not far enough to do you much good." Nora stared through the dirty window. Her trunk sat outside beneath the awning. Everything she owned was inside it. 3 dresses, 2 aprons, a winter shawl, her mother's recipe notebook, a photograph, needles and thread. $11 and some change had been tucked into the lining when she left Nebraska. Most of that money was gone. Next eastbound stage? Thursday. 4 days. "And the fare?" he told her. Nora closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, an older man was standing near the doorway. He was lean, sun-darkened, perhaps in his middle 50s, with iron-gray hair and a mustache trimmed short enough not to collect his coffee. "You Nora Whitfield?" She turned. "Who's asking?" "Joel Ramsey." He removed his hat. "Foreman at Ironwood Ranch." The name meant nothing to her. "You were talking to Martin Sutter earlier. So was half the town." Joel's mouth twitched. "That's Copper Creek. A man sneezes on Monday. Everybody knows by supper why he caught cold." Nora gathered her coins. "If you've come to discuss Mr. Sutter, I'm finished discussing him. I came because I need a cook." That stopped her. Joel explained it plainly. Ironwood was preparing to move cattle through Blackstone Pass before autumn weather closed the higher country. Their regular cook had broken his wrist after being thrown from a mule. They needed someone for 30 days. "Room and board at the ranch," Joel said. "Wages at the end of the month." "How many men?" 12 on the drive. Fewer at the ranch." "Who owns Ironwood?" Joel glanced toward the street. "Andrew McKenna." Nora pictured the enormous cowboy outside the hotel. "He knows you're asking me?" "Not exactly." Nora almost laughed. "That's encouraging. I hire the hands." "I'm not a hand. Today you are if you can cook." She looked at the coins still resting on the counter. 30 days. Enough wages to buy passage east and leave something in her pocket when she arrived. "This is temporary?" 1 month. "And after that?" "You're free to go wherever you please." That was the first thing anyone had said all day that sounded safe. "All right." Joel held out his hand. Nora shook it. Ironwood lay west of town, where the open country began folding toward the mountains. Joel loaded Nora's trunk into a supply wagon. The road quickly narrowed into 2 dusty wheel tracks bordered by sagebrush and dry grass. Cottonwoods appeared wherever water ran. In the distance, the mountains seemed close enough to touch, though Joel told her some of the ridges were more than a day's ride away. They reached Ironwood near sundown. Nora saw corrals first, then a long barn, bunkhouse, sheds, and a 2-story ranch house with a deep porch. Beyond them stretched pasture broken by fences and low ridges. Andrew McKenna stood beside the barn examining a horse's front hoof. He straightened when the wagon approached. Even from a distance, he seemed enormous. His eyes moved from Joel to Nora, then to her trunk. "You hired her." Joel climbed down. "I hired a cook." Andrew looked at Nora again. She waited for him to object. Instead, he said, 30 days? 30. Andrew wiped his hands on a rag. "The drive leaves soon. We don't have time to train somebody who doesn't know camp work." "I know camp work," Nora said. His gaze settled on her. "How much?" "Enough to know coffee takes longer to replace than patience when somebody forgets to pack it." Joel coughed into his fist. Andrew's expression barely moved. "Kitchen's through the back door." "Joel will show you the storeroom." He turned toward the barn. Joel called after him. "Could sound a little happier about it." Andrew stopped. Nora wished Joel had remained quiet. The cowboy looked back, first at his foreman, and then at the woman beside the wagon. "She's here for 30 days. "I know." "Then don't build your plans around somebody who's already looking for the road out." Nora felt the words land more sharply than Sutter's laughter had, because this time there was no cruelty in them, only certainty. Andrew walked into the barn. Joel muttered something under his breath and reached for Nora's trunk. She stopped him. "I can carry my end." Together they lifted it. As Nora crossed the yard toward the ranch house, she looked once toward the road behind them. It wound east through the fading light until dust swallowed it. 30 days. She could endure almost anything for 30 days. Earn her wages, buy her ticket, leave Wyoming. That was the plan. And if Andrew McKenna believed she already had one foot on the road out, Nora intended to prove him exactly right. The next morning began before sunrise. Nora woke to a cold gray line at the window and the muffled thud of boots crossing the porch below. Her room at Ironwood was small, but better than some she had rented in towns twice the size of Copper Creek. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a washstand against the other, and a pine peg held her second-best dress and apron. Someone had left a chipped white pitcher filled with clean water beside the basin. She dressed in the dark, pinned her hair back, and followed the smell of old coffee downstairs. The kitchen was larger than she expected, and less organized than any kitchen had a right to be. 3 sacks of flour leaned against a wall near the stove. Beans had been stored beside coffee. Salt pork sat on the wrong shelf. 2 tins of baking powder had no labels and one held nails instead. The pantry door stuck halfway open because the bottom hinge had pulled loose. Nora stood in the middle of it for several seconds. Then she took off her shawl and got to work. By the time Joel came in, she had coffee boiling and a sheet of paper covered with figures. He glanced at the pot first. "Bless you." "Don't yet." Nora pushed the paper across the work table. Joel picked it up. "What am I looking at?" "Your provisions." "We have provisions. You have the beginning of provisions." That brought his eyes up. Nora tapped the list. 12 men. 16 days if weather behaves. More if Blackstone Pass gives you trouble. You've got enough flour for maybe 11 days if nobody eats heavy, which working cattlemen always do. Beans are worse. Coffee is close, but not close enough. Dried fruit is barely worth mentioning. Joel frowned. Sam Burke did the ordering before he got hurt. The cook? Cook and wagon man. He ordered for a ranch kitchen, not a trail drive. Joel studied the figures again. You sure? Count it yourself. He did. Not immediately. He carried the paper outside first. Nora heard voices near the back steps while she was rolling biscuit dough. Andrew's voice came through the open window. She got here last night. Numbers don't care how long she's been here. She hasn't crossed Blackstone with us. Neither has that flour. A pause. Then the back door opened. Andrew entered carrying the paper. He filled the doorway without trying. In daylight, Nora noticed more of him. The sleeves of his work shirt were rolled below his elbows. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, the skin rough from rains, fence wire, weather, and years of using tools instead of talking about them. He set the sheet beside the mixing bowl. You figured 12 men. That's what Joel told me. 13 if Tom Harris comes down from the north pasture. Then you're shorter than I thought. Andrew looked at the list again. Trail portions aren't dining room portions. I know. Men eat less during a hard drive. No. They complain more and eat faster. Joel made a sound that might have been a cough. Andrew ignored him. You ever cooked a drive through mountain country? Not these mountains. Then you don't know what the weather does to time. That's why I added 2 extra days. That stopped him. His eyes moved down the figures. Nora could almost see him checking each line. He picked up the pencil. How much flour per man? She told him. Coffee? She told him that too. Salt pork? Another answer. Andrew leaned one hand on the table and worked the figures himself in the margin. Nora went back to cutting biscuits. The room stayed quiet except for the scratch of pencil, the stove draft, and Joel pouring coffee. At last, Andrew put the pencil down. She's right. Joel lifted his mug. I know. Andrew looked at Nora. She waited for praise. It didn't come. Make a new list. I already did. She pointed to another page beside the flour bin. Andrew stared at it. Joel smiled into his coffee. By 8 o'clock, half the ranch was carrying supplies. Wesley Pike was the youngest man in the yard and had the confidence of someone whose body had never yet given him a serious reason to doubt it. He had sandy hair, a crooked grin, and the unfortunate habit of speaking one thought before considering the next. Nora was checking a sack of cornmeal when Wesley shouldered another beside her. Miss Whitfield, right? Nora will do. He nodded toward the corrected supply stack. Joel says you caught us short. I counted. Wesley looked at her, then at the food. A grin started. Suppose a lady who studies meals that close would know a good deal about appetite. The men nearest him went quiet. Not shocked. Waiting. Nora had heard better insults from boys too young to shave. She tied the sack closed. Before she could answer, Andrew spoke from behind Wesley. You finished unloading the west wagon? Wesley's grin vanished. Almost. If you've got enough breath left to laugh, you've got enough breath to finish it. Andrew handed him another flour sack, then stacked the beans. Wesley took the sack. Yes, sir. He walked away, red creeping above his collar. Andrew didn't look at Nora. He picked up a crate of canned peaches and carried it toward the chuck wagon as though nothing had happened. That bothered her more than if he had made a speech. She wasn't used to kindness that didn't stop to admire itself. By noon, the yard smelled of leather, horse sweat, dust, and coffee. Nora worked beside Joel, checking each crate before it was tied down. She found 2 cracked jars of molasses, a sack of flour with mouse damage along one corner, and a coffee tin that had been counted twice. Andrew noticed all 3 corrections. He said nothing. But each time she changed something, he adjusted the loading without argument. Near mid-afternoon, Nora climbed into the chuck wagon to inspect the storage box beneath the driver's seat. When she stepped down, her boot caught in a broken strip of wood. Andrew's hand closed around her forearm before she fell. Firm. Immediate. He steadied her, then released her at once. That board split. I noticed. After stepping on it, I noticed things in my own order. His mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. He crouched, pulled the loose strip free, and called for a hammer. Nora stood there a moment longer than she needed to, then went back to work. Supper was simple. Beef stew, biscuits, stewed apples. 13 men ate at the long table in the ranch house because everyone was too tired to bother with the bunkhouse stove. Wesley sat near the far end. He didn't joke. When Nora brought the biscuit basket around, he hesitated. Miss Whitfield. She looked at him. About this morning. She waited. I was being stupid. Yes. His face tightened. Then Nora placed another biscuit on his plate. But you're young enough to improve. Joel laughed out loud. Even Andrew looked down at his coffee for a second. Later, after the dishes were washed and the men had gone, Nora returned to the pantry to check the next morning's stores. A sheet of paper lay on the work table. Andrew's handwriting. The original trail list had been crossed through and rewritten from top to bottom. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, dried apples, cornmeal, lard. Every quantity matched hers. Nora ran one finger down the page. No note, no thanks, no apology, just the numbers. Behind her, the floorboard creaked. Andrew stood in the doorway holding an empty coffee mug. Joel said, "We're leaving Thursday. Then tomorrow we'll be busy." "It will." His eyes moved to the rewritten list. "You were right." Nora looked at him. That must have hurt. A pause. Then, very faintly, one corner of his mouth lifted. "Don't get used to it." He set the mug beside the basin and left. Nora listened to his boots cross the porch. 30 days, she reminded herself. 30 days was not long enough to mistake respect for anything else. She folded the supply list and tucked it beside the pantry ledger. Outside, men were tightening cinches and checking wheels beneath the last light of evening. Blackstone Pass waited beyond the western ridges. And for the first time since arriving in Copper Creek, Nora found herself wondering whether leaving Ironwood would feel quite as simple as arriving had. They left before sunrise on Thursday. The ranch yard was still blue with early light when the first cattle moved through the west gate, hooves knocking softly against packed earth. Men rode in pairs along the edges of the herd. Joel drove the supply wagon, and Nora sat beside him with her apron folded beneath her coat and a wool shawl tucked behind the seat for later. Andrew rode ahead. Even at a distance, he was easy to pick out. His horse was a tall black gelding, but Andrew still seemed too large for it. He sat quietly in the saddle, shoulders broad beneath a brown canvas coat, turning now and then to watch the herd stretch along the road behind him. For the first hour, Nora had very little to do except hold on. The trail climbed west from Ironwood through open sage, then narrowed where the foothills began folding into one another. Dust hung low behind the cattle. By mid-morning, pine appeared along the slopes, and the air grew cooler. Joel nodded toward the darker ridges ahead. Blackstone. Nora looked up. The pass cut between two granite shoulders, narrow enough that the road seemed to vanish into shadow. How bad? Joel considered. Depends what mood it's in. Roads have moods? Mountain roads do. The first camp was made beside a shallow creek where grass remained green beneath the cottonwoods. Nora learned quickly that cooking on a trail had little resemblance to a boarding house kitchen. There was no table worth mentioning, no pantry, no clean shelf waiting for her hand. Only a chuck box, 3 iron pots, a coffee grinder, a Dutch oven, and whatever level patch of ground she could claim before the cattle covered it in dust. She worked anyway. By sunset, stew simmered beside the fire and biscuits browned beneath coals. The men ate with the concentration of people who had spent 12 hours outdoors. Wesley reached for a third biscuit. Nora looked at him. He stopped. Am I allowed? If you have to ask, probably not. Joel laughed into his cup. Wesley took it anyway. Andrew ate apart from the louder men, sitting on an overturned bucket near the edge of the firelight. Nora noticed that he finished everything she gave him, but never reached for more unless she offered. She offered once. He looked at the ladle, then at her. You counting? Always. He held out the bowl. The second day carried them deeper into the pass. The road became rockier. Wagon wheels struck exposed stone with hard wooden knocks. In places, the trail dropped sharply on one side toward a creek far below. Nora stopped looking down. Near noon, clouds gathered over the western ridge. Joel saw them first. Rain. Andrew rode back along the herd. How far to the line shack? 3 miles, maybe 4. We'll push. The men tightened the cattle together and increased the pace. The supply wagon began bouncing harder. Nora braced one hand against the seat. A sharp crack sounded beneath them. Joel pulled the team hard. The wagon lurched. One side dropped. Nora grabbed the edge of the seat before she was thrown. Behind them, a wheel leaned outward at an ugly angle. Joel climbed down. Andrew was there within seconds. They both crouched beside the wheel. Hub? Andrew asked. Joel shook his head. Spoke split. Rim's starting to go too. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the ridge. Nora looked back at the wagon. Flour, coffee, salt pork, beans, dried fruit. Nearly everything they would need for the rest of the drive. Andrew stood. We unload half and carry what matters. Carry it where? Nora asked. He pointed up trail. Men can take sacks horseback until Joel gets the wheel holding. And the rest? Cover it. Nora looked at the sky. The clouds had gone nearly black. A canvas cover wouldn't save flour if rain came sideways. She turned toward the slope. Through the trees, perhaps 200 yards away, she saw a low roof. What's that? Joel followed her gaze. Old line shack. Does it have a floor? If it hasn't fallen in. Nora was already climbing down. Andrew caught her meaning. No. She stopped. No? We don't have time to haul everything over there. We don't have time to lose half our food either. The herd can't stand here. Then the herd doesn't. Andrew's jaw tightened. Nora pointed toward the shack. Take the cattle ahead with half the men. Leave Joel, me, and whoever else you can spare. We move everything dry into that shack. Joel fixes the wheel. When it holds, we reload. Thunder cracked closer. Andrew looked at the wagon, then at the shack, then at Nora. That's a lot of carrying. You have 12 men. Most are busy with cattle. You have enough. I don't like splitting the crew, and I don't like serving wet flour. For one long second, nobody spoke. Then Andrew bent, lifted a 50-pound flour sack onto his shoulder, and started toward the shack. Joel smiled. Well, guess that's settled. The others followed. Rain began before the third trip. At first, only scattered drops darkened the dust. Then the sky opened. Men ran between the wagon and the shack, carrying sacks beneath coats, arms wrapped around coffee tins, crates pressed to their chests. Nora carried smaller loads, refusing to waste time pretending she could manage the largest. Inside, the shack smelled of old wood, mouse nests, and damp earth, but the floorboards were sound. She stacked flour away from the wall, coffee above it, salt pork nearest the door. Not there, she told Wesley as he dropped a bean sack. Why? Roof leak. He looked up. A drop hit his nose. Right. Outside, Joel worked under the wagon with a hammer, brace, and lengths of rawhide. Andrew moved back and forth through the rain without slowing. On his fourth trip, his coat was soaked through. Nora held out a towel. He looked at it. What? Your face, I have one. It isn't doing you much good covered in rain. He took the towel. For the first time, she saw him grin properly. Only for a second. By late afternoon, the storm had weakened. Joel tested the repaired wheel and declared it ugly but serviceable. They reloaded. Nothing important had been ruined. Not one sack of flour. Not one tin of coffee. When they finally reached the night camp, darkness had already settled between the pines. Everyone was exhausted. Nora made stew from beef, potatoes, onions, and the last of a jar of tomatoes she had packed at Ironwood. She thickened it carefully, stretching it just enough without thinning it into water. The men ate in silence. Andrew finished his first bowl, then held it out. Nora raised an eyebrow. Counting? Always. She gave him another. He ate half before speaking. Sutter was a fool. Nora looked across the fire at him. The men around them grew quieter without pretending to. For turning me away? For deciding what you could do before you did it? Nora stirred the pot. Sutter has plenty of company. Andrew looked into his bowl. Probably. That was all. But later, as Nora rinsed tin plates in creek water warmed over the fire, she caught Andrew carrying the empty flour sack she had used beneath the wagon seat to keep her feet from slipping. He shook the mud from it, folded it, placed it back where she'd had it. No reason to do that. No reason except he had noticed. The next morning came clear and cold. Mist hung over the creek. The men saddled without much talking. Joel walked the repaired wagon wheel twice, checking every spoke. Andrew stood at the edge of camp looking toward the narrow trail ahead. Nora followed his gaze. The mountain road climbed sharply between dark rock walls. What is it? She asked. Andrew pulled on his gloves. The worst part of Blackstone. Yesterday wasn't? No. He mounted. Yesterday was just the introduction. Nora watched him ride toward the head of the herd. By full morning, she understood what he meant. The trail narrowed until the wagon wheels seemed to run inches from the edge in places. Black rock rose on one side, broken by roots and scrub pine. On the other, the ground fell sharply toward a creek that flashed silver far below. Joel kept both hands tight on the reins. Don't look down too long, he said. I wasn't planning to. You were looking. I was gathering information. Joel smiled without taking his eyes off the road. The repaired wagon wheel complained on every hard turn. Nora listened to it almost as closely as Joel did. Ahead, Andrew had slowed the cattle where the trail bent around a washout. Several riders were already moving into position, keeping the herd from pressing too hard into the narrow stretch. Andrew raised one hand. The whole line slowed. It impressed Nora how quickly men responded to him. He rarely shouted unless distance required it. Most of the time, one gesture was enough. Wesley rode along the uphill side of the herd, working a restless sorrel mare. The horse had been uneasy since breakfast. Nora had noticed the way its ears kept cutting backward and how often Wesley shortened the reins. Andrew noticed too. Give her room, he called. I've got her. Andrew's head turned. Wesley, I said I've got her. The mare stepped sideways. A hoof struck loose stone. The animal jerked hard, scrambling for footing. Everything happened at once. The mare lurched toward the washed-out edge. Wesley pulled the reins too sharply. The horse reared, twisted, and came down crooked. Wesley was thrown clear. His body hit the trail and rolled once before stopping against a low bank of rock. The mare bolted uphill. 3 cattle nearest her spooked. Then 6. Then more. The herd began bunching. Men shouted. Hooves hammered the ground. Dust rose so fast, Nora lost sight of Andrew for a moment. Stay with the wagon, Joel yelled. Nora was already climbing down. Wesley's hurt, and cattle will kill you faster than a bad fall. She looked. Wesley wasn't moving. I'm not leaving him there. Before Joel could stop her, Nora crossed the inside edge of the trail, keeping close to the rock wall, while Andrew and the riders pushed the cattle forward and away from the washout. Andrew saw her. His face changed. "Nora!" She pointed at Wesley. Andrew looked once toward the herd, once toward the young man on the ground. Then he made the choice he had to make. "Get to him. Stay against the wall." Nora reached Wesley and dropped to her knees. His eyes were open. That helped. "Can you hear me?" He blinked. "Unfortunately." "Good. Where does it hurt?" "My pride. That isn't fatal." His mouth moved as if he wanted to smile, then tightened. "Leg." Nora looked down. His right trouser leg was dusty from hip to boot, but nothing appeared badly out of place. She ran her hands carefully down the outside of the limb. When she reached the lower leg, Wesley sucked in a breath. "There?" "Yes." "Ankle?" "Mostly above it." "Can you move your toes?" He did. Nora let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Behind them, Andrew's voice carried through the dust. "Keep them moving! Don't let them turn!" The ground shook. Nora stayed low. "You're going to be all right. You sound mighty sure." "I'm not. But you don't need to know that." Wesley looked at her. "You really do panic afterward." "Quiet." She waved toward Joel. "I need 2 straight pieces of wood and cloth." Joel came as soon as the herd had cleared enough for him to leave the wagon. He brought a pair of short wagon slats and a folded flour sack. Nora tore the cleanest section into strips. "No bone through the skin," she said. "Could be a bad sprain. Could be a break. Either way, he shouldn't put weight on it." Joel crouched beside her. "You know how to splint?" "I know enough not to let it move." They worked carefully. Nora patted the leg first, then placed the slats along either side and tied them snug without pulling too tight. Wesley gripped the dirt with one hand. "Sorry," Nora said. "Don't be. That wasn't permission to swear. I wasn't going to. You were thinking about it loudly." He laughed once through clenched teeth. By the time Andrew returned, the cattle had been moved beyond the narrowest stretch and held in a wider meadow ahead. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped. "How bad?" "Leg injury. I don't think it's life-threatening, but he isn't walking on it." Andrew crouched beside Wesley. "You feeling your foot?" "Yes." "Head?" "Still attached." Andrew looked at Nora. "You check him for dizziness?" I asked. "No vomiting?" "No." Andrew nodded once. The tension in his shoulders eased only slightly. They rigged a place for Wesley in the wagon, laying bedrolls beneath him to soften the jolting. Joel drove slower after that. Andrew rode beside the wagon for nearly an hour. He didn't talk. Every few minutes he looked in. Not at Nora. At Wesley. Then Nora. Then the road. By afternoon, the worst of Blackstone Pass had fallen behind them. They camped in a sheltered basin where pines blocked most of the wind. The cattle grazed quietly beyond the fire. Wesley lay near the wagon with his injured leg propped on a rolled blanket, complaining mostly because everyone had forbidden him from doing anything useful. Nora handed him coffee. "You're enjoying this." "Immensely." "You don't sound sympathetic." "I'm not." Andrew was sitting nearby sharpening a small knife against a whetstone. He glanced up. "How'd you stay that calm?" Nora looked at him. "During what?" "Wesley's fall." She stirred the stew. "I panic afterward." Andrew's hand stopped on the stone. Then he laughed. Not the almost smile she had seen before. A real laugh. Low and brief, but unmistakable. Every man near the fire looked up. Wesley raised his head. "Well, I'll be damned." Andrew's face closed again. "What?" "Nothing." "Then keep it that way." Wesley grinned into his cup. Nora looked down at the pot so no one would notice her own smile. Later, after supper, the camp quieted. Wesley was asleep. Joel had gone to check the horses. Andrew stood near the fire while Nora wrapped the remaining biscuits in cloth. "Where'd you learn to handle injuries?" "My mother? She a nurse?" "No." Nora tied the cloth. She cooked for railroad boarding houses. Men came in burned, cut, fevered, half-frozen. Doctors cost money, and sometimes the nearest one was miles away. Andrew waited. She fed them, cleaned wounds when she had to, learned what she could from people passing through, and taught you. Everything she thought might keep me from needing someone else. That last part came out quieter than Nora intended. Andrew's eyes stayed on the fire. Useful lessons. Useful isn't always the same as kind. He looked at her then. Nora didn't explain. For a few seconds, only the fire moved between them. Andrew finally picked up his coffee mug. My father taught me the same way. About cooking? That pulled another small smile from him. About not needing help. Nora folded the dish towel over the wagon box. How'd that work out? Andrew looked toward Wesley's bedroll, then toward the men beyond the fire, still deciding. He walked away to check the night riders. Nora watched him go. The giant cowboy who had barely wanted her at Ironwood had trusted her with an injured man without questioning her twice. And when she had spoken about her mother, he hadn't tried to fix the memory or soften it. He had simply stayed long enough to understand what she meant. By morning, the trail would begin descending toward open country again. Blackstone Pass had taken one wagon spoke, one sound leg, and most of the crew's patience. But as Nora settled beneath her blankets that night, she realized it had given her something too. For the first time, Andrew McKenna no longer seemed to be waiting for her to fail. The cattle drive returned to Ironwood 12 days later. By then, Wesley could put some weight on his injured leg, though Joel still made him ride in the wagon over the roughest ground. The repaired wheel survived every mile home. So did the flour, the coffee, and every other provision Nora had fought to save. When the ranch buildings appeared beyond the last rise, the men changed. They sat straighter. Someone whistled. Wesley leaned out from beneath the wagon canvas and shouted at the barn as if it might answer him. Nora understood. Ironwood did not look impressive from a distance. The house needed paint. One corner of the bunkhouse roof sagged. Wind had bent the weather vane on the barn until it pointed nowhere useful. But after Blackstone Pass, it looked warm. That bothered her. Warm places were easier to miss. The next morning, Joel found her in the pantry counting jars. 30 days, he said. Nora looked up. What about them? Today's your last. She had been keeping count. Of course she had. Her wages sat folded inside an envelope in the top drawer of her room. Enough for passage east once she returned to Copper Creek, with a little left over to survive until she found another kitchen. That had been the plan from the beginning. Joel leaned against the doorframe. We're behind. On what? Everything winter expects. He started counting on his fingers. Vegetables need putting up. 2 hogs are ready for slaughter. Smokehouse needs clearing before we hang anything. Root cellar needs sorting. Dried beans came in late and half the apples from the lower orchard are still on the trees. Sounds unpleasant. It is. Then I'm glad I'm leaving. Joel studied her face. Nora returned to the shelves. He waited. You don't mean that. I mean I'm leaving. Not the same thing. She set down a jar. What are you asking? Stay until first heavy snow. Nora turned. Joel's expression had lost its teasing. I can pay you the same monthly rate. Room and board stays as it is. Could be 5 weeks. Could be 8. Wyoming decides. Nora looked toward the kitchen. Through the doorway, she could see the long table. Wesley sat at one end, drinking coffee with his injured leg stretched beneath another chair. 2 hands were arguing quietly about whose turn it was to repair the South Corral gate. It had become ordinary. That was dangerous. You've got other men, Nora said. I've got men who can chase cattle and ruin vegetables. I thought you survived before me. That's a generous description, Wesley called from the table. Miss Whitfield, if you leave, Joel's going to make me cook. You can barely walk. Exactly. Think of the danger. One of the older hands raised his mug. I've eaten Pike's biscuits. They can be used for fence repair. Laughter moved around the table. Wesley pointed accusingly. That happened once. 3 times. Nora smiled despite herself. Then she looked toward the back door. Andrew had entered without her hearing him. He removed his hat, set it on the peg by the wall, and took in the room Joel, Wesley, Nora. Her smile disappeared. Joel spoke first. I asked Nora to stay until first snow. Andrew's eyes rested on her. Only for a second. Then he walked to the coffee pot. Did you? I did. Nora waited. Andrew poured coffee. Nothing. Wesley frowned at him openly. Well? Andrew looked at the younger man. Well, what? Don't you have an opinion? On whether Miss Whitfield takes paid work? On whether you want her to stay? The room went quiet. Nora wished the floor would open. Andrew's hand tightened slightly around the mug. It's her decision. That was all. He walked back outside. Wesley muttered something. Joel gave him a look. Nora turned toward the pantry before anyone could study her face. It's a fair offer, she said. Joel waited. Until first heavy snow? That's what I said. Nora looked once more at the door Andrew had gone through. All right. By evening, she had unpacked the few things she'd already begun folding into her trunk. Not completely. Just enough. Her mother's recipe notebook went back into the kitchen drawer where she kept it during the day. Her extra apron returned to its hook. The heavy shawl she had meant to carry east remained folded at the foot of her bed. Downstairs, a door opened and closed. Nora paused. Andrew's footsteps crossed the hall, then stopped. For a moment she thought he might come upstairs. He didn't. His boots moved away. Nora shut the trunk harder than necessary. The next few weeks settled into autumn. Cottonwoods along the creek turned yellow first. The mornings sharpened. Frost appeared once on the water trough and vanished by breakfast. Ironwood shifted toward winter. Nora worked beside Joel to sort root vegetables and mark sacks with charcoal. She boiled jars in the biggest kettle they owned. Apples became butter, preserves, and pie filling. Meat was salted and hung. Dried herbs collected from the garden were tied in bundles near the kitchen window. The ranch hands stopped treating the house like somewhere they entered only to eat. They stayed. Wesley began playing cards with two others at the far end of the table after supper. Joel read old newspapers beside the stove. Men repaired gloves, cleaned tack, argued over cattle prices. Some evenings, Andrew sat with them. Not always, but more than before. Nora learned that he drank coffee black, took no sugar, and preferred the heel of a fresh loaf. She learned he rubbed the scar on his left thumb when worried. He learned that she hummed without realizing it when kneading bread. Neither mentioned any of those things. One night Andrew came in after dark, carrying a broken harness buckle. Nora was alone in the kitchen. Joel asleep? Probably pretending to be. Andrew placed the buckle on the table. Need a small punch. Second drawer in the workroom. He looked at her. How do you know? Because nobody here puts anything back except me. He almost smiled. Then his eyes moved toward the pantry where jars lined the shelves. You've done a lot. We're still short on onions. I'll get some in town. That surprised her. You? I occasionally enter civilization. I hadn't noticed. This time he did smile. Small. Gone quickly. Nora turned back to the bread dough before he could see how much she noticed. Later that week, she heard Joel and Wesley talking outside the kitchen window. She's staying through snow, Wesley said. That's what she agreed. You think she'll stay after? A pause. Joel answered quietly. That isn't ours to decide. Nora moved away from the window. The question stayed. She did not ask it herself. Andrew certainly didn't. One afternoon, while she was carrying folded cloth toward the pantry, she found him standing at the base of the stairs. His gaze had lifted toward the open door of her room. The trunk was visible from below. Open again. She was reorganizing winter clothes, nothing more. But Andrew looked at it as though it meant something. Nora stopped. Looking for something? His eyes came back to hers. No. He moved aside to let her pass. She waited for him to say more. He didn't. That night, Joel finally told her why. They were peeling apples at the kitchen table while the others worked outside. Andrew nearly married once. Nora's knife slowed. I didn't ask. No. Joel cut another strip of peel, but you've been wondering. She said nothing. Joel continued. Her name was Rebecca Hale. 8 years ago. Good family. Pretty. Educated. Liked Andrew well enough. What happened? She tried ranch life. Joel dropped an apple slice into the bowl. Lasted less than a season. Told him Ironwood felt like the edge of the earth. Said if she stayed here, she'd suffocate. Nora looked through the window. Andrew was outside splitting kindling, each swing of the axe clean and measured. What did he do? Helped load her things. That's all. That's Andrew. Joel wiped the knife on a cloth. He won't ask somebody to stay where they don't want to be. Nora watched another piece of wood split. Something inside her shifted. Not relief. That would have been easier. Because now Andrew's silence no longer meant what she had thought. Or perhaps it did. There was no way to know. First snow threatened 3 mornings later. Not much. Only a scattering of white on the western peaks. Wesley saw it through the window and groaned. Don't count that. Joel looked up from his coffee. Count what? Snow. It's snow. It's on the mountain. Still snow. Wesley turned to Nora. You said heavy snow. I did. Good. Then you're not allowed to leave over 6 flakes on a rock. One of the men laughed. She's not leaving, another added. Not if we hide her trunk. Nora shook her head. You men are getting very comfortable giving orders to the person who controls breakfast. That quieted them. Andrew entered during the laughter. What did I miss? Wesley's planning to steal Nora's trunk, Joel said. Andrew stopped. Wesley looked suddenly interested in his plate. I was joking. Andrew's gaze moved to Nora. The room waited, again. And again he said nothing about wanting her to remain. He only crossed to the stove, found his coffee mug, and poured. Nora watched the dark stream fill it. Everyone but him, Joel had asked. Wesley asked every other day. The hands complained about what would happen when she was gone. Even the old barn cat had started waiting beside the kitchen door each morning as though Nora belonged to the place. But Andrew McKenna would not say it. She told herself she understood now. She told herself it shouldn't matter. And then Andrew carried his coffee toward the porch, paused beside her, and quietly set a folded pair of new wool gloves on the work table. Cold's coming, he said. Before Nora could answer, he was gone. She picked up the gloves. They were plain, practical, large enough for her hands without being tight. Someone had noticed. Someone had remembered. Nora looked toward the closed door. Andrew could buy her gloves. Trust her judgment. Laugh beside a campfire. Let her turn his ranch house into a place where men wanted to linger. He could do all of that. He just couldn't ask her to stay. The autumn supper in Copper Creek came on a Saturday near the end of October, when the cottonwoods had gone mostly gold and the morning smelled of cold iron and wood smoke. Joel insisted Ironwood should send something to the church tables. Wesley insisted Nora should come with them. Andrew said nothing either way. That nearly decided her against going. Then Carolyn Webb stopped by the ranch 2 days before the supper with a sack of apples from a neighboring orchard and told Nora she had heard about the preserves at Ironwood. You ought to bring something, Caroline said. Folks talk less when their mouths are full. Nora looked at the apples. That's your professional advice? I've owned a bakery 7 years. It's the closest thing I have to scripture. So Nora made apple dumplings. She rolled the dough thin, wrapped each apple with brown sugar and spice, and baked them until the kitchen smelled warm enough to make the ranch hands invent reasons to come inside. Wesley tried to steal one. Nora slapped his hand with a towel. You want to keep all 10 fingers? I was checking quality. You can check quality after Copper Creek does. Andrew came in while she was lifting the last pan from the oven. He stopped near the doorway. His eyes went to the dumplings, then to Nora. You made enough? For the supper. That's not what I asked. Nora looked at him. You want one? No. A pause. Maybe half. Wesley laughed so hard he nearly dropped a plate. By late afternoon, they rode into Copper Creek in 2 wagons. The town looked different under autumn light. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Horses stood tied outside the church hall. Lanterns had already been hung beneath the eaves, though sunset was still an hour away. Inside, long tables had been pushed together and covered with mismatched cloths. Women carried pies, roasted chickens, bread, boiled potatoes, jars of pickles, and cakes with sugar icing. Men stood near the doors pretending not to be hungry. Nora placed her dumplings near the center table. For the first 20 minutes, nobody asked who had made them. They only ate. One pan emptied, then another. A rancher's wife Nora did not know asked whether there were more. Nora was reaching for the 3rd pan when she heard Martin Sutter's voice behind her. Well now, I should have guessed. The room changed before she even turned. Not silent, just attentive. Sutter stood near the coffee urn with two men from the hotel. He had a napkin tucked beneath one thumb and half a dumpling on his plate. His eyes moved from the food to Nora, then lower. Nora knew that look too. He smiled. McKenna's oversized camp cook. One of the men beside him gave a short laugh. Sutter lifted his fork. I suppose Ironwood's buying flour by the wagon load these days. A few people nearby laughed because he had laughed first. Nora felt the heat rise into her face. The old instinct came immediately. Look down. Let it pass. Make yourself smaller until the moment ends. She put the serving spoon down, slowly, then wiped her hands on her apron. Funny thing, she said. Sutter's smile widened. Nora looked directly at him. Men always seem to remember the size of the cook after they've forgotten who fed them. Nobody laughed. Someone coughed near the wall. Sutter's expression tightened. Nora picked the serving spoon back up. That was when Carolyn Webb stepped forward carrying an empty plate. I'll have another. Nora looked at her. Caroline's face remained perfectly ordinary, as though nothing had happened. As long as Mr. Sutter hasn't eaten the last one. A woman beside Caroline smiled. I'd like one too. Then another plate appeared, and another. Within a minute, the third pan was nearly empty. Sutter stood there with his half-eaten dumpling, and nowhere useful to put his eyes. Nora did not look toward Andrew. She refused to. If he had seen it, he had seen it. If he hadn't, that was probably better. She spent the next half hour helping pour coffee and talking to Caroline about flour prices. Only when the room grew crowded did Nora step outside for air. The evening had turned sharp. Lantern light spilled from the hall windows onto the dirt street. Nora stood near the side wall, rubbing warmth back into her fingers. Voices came from the other side of the building. Sutter and Andrew. Nora stilled. You made your point inside, Sutter was saying. Andrew's voice came lower. I didn't make any point inside. Nora moved closer without meaning to. Sutter gave a dry laugh. Then what is this? This is business. A pause. Say something like that about Nora again, and Ironwood stops doing business with your hotel. The silence that followed felt different from the one inside. Sutter answered first. You're serious? Yes. You'd pull every cattle dinner, every room booking, every supply meal over a joke? Wasn't much of a joke. You're getting touchy over a cook. Andrew's reply came without hesitation. I'm getting tired of a man confusing cruelty with wit. Nora's fingers closed around the edge of her shawl. Sutter muttered something she couldn't hear. Boots shifted on the dirt. Then Andrew said, We're done. Nora stepped back before either man rounded the corner. She walked toward the wagon and busied herself straightening a blanket that did not need straightening. Andrew appeared a minute later. He saw her. For a second, she wondered if he knew she had heard. His face gave nothing away. Cold? A little. He took off one glove and checked the wagon brake lever. We'll leave soon. Nora nodded. That was all. But on the road home, she sat beside Joel with her hands folded in her lap and watched Andrew riding ahead beneath the pale moon. He had defended her when he thought she would never know. That mattered more than she wanted it to. Ironwood was quiet when they returned. The men carried empty pans inside. Wesley complained that Copper Creek had eaten everything worth bringing home. Joel told him that was the idea. Nora went to the pantry to put away what little remained. She found Andrew's purchase book on the end of the table beneath a stack of receipts. It had been left open. Normally she would have closed it and moved on. Then one number caught her eye. She knew numbers the way some people knew faces. The receipt showed 86 head delivered to Lewis Barrett's buyers earlier that month. The tally written in Andrew's book said 92. Nora frowned. She pulled another receipt from beneath it. 71 purchased. The ranch tally showed 76. A third. Another difference. Small. Easy to miss. But repeated. Nora sat down. The kitchen had gone quiet around her. Outside, someone closed the barn doors. A horse stamped in the yard. Wind moved against the window glass. She placed the 3 receipts in a row, then took a pencil, added the missing cattle, added the payments, checked again. The numbers still didn't agree. Nora looked toward the dark doorway. A few hours earlier, she had thought Martin Sutter was the ugliest thing waiting for Ironwood and Copper Creek. Now she wasn't so sure, because somebody had been taking cattle out of Andrew McKenna's accounts. And whatever was wrong, it had been happening long before Nora Whitfield ever came to Ironwood. She stayed at the pantry table until the lamp burned low. 3 receipts, 3 different shipments, 3 small shortages, none large enough to shout. Together, they whispered. The next morning, Nora waited until breakfast was over. Andrew stood near the stove pulling on his gloves. Joel was outside checking a wagon tongue. Wesley had gone to the bunkhouse for his coat. Nora set the receipts on the table. "Before you leave, I need you to look at something." Andrew glanced down. "What?" "These." He stepped closer. Nora pointed to the first paper. "Your ranch tally says 92 head. Barrett's receipt says 86. Andrew frowned. "Could be sorting loss." "Then this one." She slid another sheet forward. 76 in your book. 71 on the receipt." Andrew's eyes sharpened. "And this one. Another difference." The room changed. Not because he raised his voice. He didn't. He simply stopped moving. "Where'd you get these? They were under your purchase book last night. You went through my accounts?" Nora looked at him. "I found papers sitting on the kitchen table. Those are ranch records." "I know what they are. They aren't kitchen business." The words hit harder than she expected. Nora folded her hands. "Then don't leave them in the kitchen." Andrew's jaw tightened. "That's not the point." "No. The point is someone may have undercounted your cattle 3 times. You don't know that. I know numbers. You know provisions." Nora stood. "Those aren't different things when somebody is stealing from you." Andrew stared at her. She could see the wall going up, the same one he wore when he thought control mattered more than conversation. "Raymond Fitch handled those shipments," he said. "He's worked for Lewis Barrett 6 years. And? And Barrett doesn't hire fools. Plenty of smart men hire thieves." His expression hardened. "You've been here 2 months. And that makes subtraction different?" "Nora. No." She tapped the receipts. "You trust me to count enough flour to keep 12 men fed in the mountains. You trust me to treat Wesley when he comes off a horse. You trust me to tell you when the pantry will last through winter." Andrew said nothing. "But I show you 3 numbers that don't match, and suddenly I'm only the cook. That's not what I said. It is exactly what you said." The silence was sharp. Nora could hear the ticking of the cooling stove. Andrew picked up the receipts. "I'll look at them. Do that." He left without another word. Nora stood beside the table long after the door closed. Her hands had gone cold. She was angry with him. Angrier because part of her had expected better. By noon, the ranch had settled into work again. Nora carried potatoes up from the cellar, trimmed bruised apples, and tried not to listen every time hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Andrew did not come in for lunch. That was unusual. Joel did. He looked at Nora once and seemed to decide against asking. Smart man. Near sunset, Andrew finally returned. Mud darkened his boots. He carried 2 ledgers under one arm. Nora was kneading dough. He placed the books on the work table. Then another. Then a packet of receipts tied with string. Nora looked at them. "What is this? Everything from June forward?" She wiped flour from her hands. Andrew pulled out a chair. "I checked the 3 you found." "And?" "They're wrong. Your book or the receipts? That's what I want to know." He untied the string. "There are more." Nora sat. Andrew opened the first ledger. His handwriting ran down the page in clean columns. Dates, head counts, weights, buyer, price. Nora turned to the receipt packet. "Who records the cattle leaving Ironwood?" "Usually Joel. Sometimes me." "And who receives them?" "Fitch or one of Barrett's men." "Barrett pays from their tally?" "Yes." She looked up. "So if the ranch records say 92 left here and Fitch says 86 arrived, 6 head disappear somewhere between. Or somebody wrote wrong. Once, maybe." Andrew nodded. "Not 3 times." The anger had left his face. Something heavier had replaced it. Nora found the next discrepancy 20 minutes later. Then another. The pattern stretched farther back than she had thought. 5 head, 7, 4, 9. Small enough to hide inside ordinary confusion, enough to matter over time. Joel came in and stood behind Andrew. "What have you got?" Andrew turned the ledger around. Joel read. His face changed. "That can't be right." "It is," Nora said. Joel pulled up a chair. For the next hour, the three of them worked by lamplight. Nora read receipts. Joel remembered drives. Andrew checked dates. By the time the coffee pot was empty, they had counted 31 head missing from recorded transactions over several months. 31. Not vanished from the range. Vanished on paper. Joel leaned back. "That's money." "Yes," Andrew said. "Enough to matter." Andrew looked toward the window. Outside, the yard had gone black, all handled by Fitch. Nora tapped the receipts. "Every one." Joel rubbed his chin. "Could Barrett know?" Andrew's face tightened. "If he does, we're in deeper trouble than missing cattle." No one spoke for a moment. Nora gathered the papers into separate piles. "Then don't accuse anyone yet." Andrew looked at her. She continued. "Make copies of every figure. Keep the originals separate. Ask Barrett about one shipment, not all of them. See how he answers." Joel nodded slowly. Andrew did not. Not at first. Then he said, "You sound like you've done this before. I've worked kitchens where food went missing. Not the same." "No. People lie the same way." That earned the smallest movement at the corner of his mouth. Not amusement, exactly. Recognition. Joel stood. "I'll get the old summer tally sheets from the office." When he left, Nora and Andrew were alone. The kitchen felt smaller than it had that morning. Andrew closed one ledger. "I was wrong." Nora looked at him. He stared down at the cover. "About what?" "About it not being your business." She waited. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the book. "I shouldn't have said that." Nora could have made him work harder for the apology. Part of her wanted to. Instead, she said, "No, you shouldn't have." Andrew nodded. "Fair enough." The next morning, Nora came downstairs before dawn. A lamp was already burning in the kitchen. Andrew stood beside the table. Every ledger was there. Every receipt. Joel's old tally sheets, too. And beside Nora's usual coffee cup sat a sharpened pencil. Andrew poured coffee, set the pot down, then pushed the first ledger toward her. "Show me what I missed." Nora looked at him. No argument, no wounded pride, no reminder that she was hired to cook. Just the work. She sat down. Andrew took the chair beside her. Outside, the first light had not yet touched the Bighorn foothills. Inside, two people who had started as employer and temporary cook bent over the same page, their shoulders nearly touching as they followed a trail neither of them yet understood. And somewhere beyond Ironwood, Raymond Fitch had no idea that the woman Martin Sutter had laughed out of a hotel kitchen had just found the hole in his numbers. For 3 days, the ledgers stayed on the kitchen table. Breakfast moved around them. So did supper. Joel carried old tally sheets in from the ranch office. Wesley brought receipts he found folded inside a saddlebag used on one of the summer drives. Andrew rode twice to the North Pasture to speak with men who had helped push cattle to Barrett's buyers. Each time, the same thing happened. Ironwood's count was higher than the buyer's count. Not by much. Never enough to seem impossible. Just enough to bleed a ranch slowly. On the 4th morning, Andrew came in before sunrise wearing his heavy coat. Nora was pouring coffee. "You're leaving early." "Town." She glanced at the ledgers. "Barrett?" "Yes." "I'll come." Andrew took the cup from her. "No." Nora looked at him. He drank once, then set the mug down. "I need to talk to Barrett alone." "Why?" "Because if Fitch is stealing, I don't know how much Barrett knows. Then you need the person who found the pattern. I need you here." There was something different in his tone. Too final. Nora folded the towel in her hands. "That's not an answer. It is today." Andrew reached for his hat. She stepped between him and the door. Not close enough to challenge his size. She didn't need to. "You told me to show you what you missed." "I did. And now that it might be dangerous, I'm back in the kitchen. His jaw tightened. This isn't about your work. It sounds exactly like my work until it becomes inconvenient. Nora. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Joel, halfway down the hall, stopped and quietly turned back the other way. Andrew lowered his voice. If Fitch has been doing this for months, he may not take kindly to being found out. And I'm not taking you into that. Taking me? Nora stared at him. I didn't ask you to take me anywhere. I said I was coming. You work for me. The moment the words left his mouth, Andrew seemed to know he had chosen badly. Nora went still. That's supposed to settle it? No. It sounded like it. He removed his hat again. Nora, listen. I have been listening my whole life. Her voice stayed low, but the room seemed to shrink around it. Men telling me where to stand because I take up too much room somewhere else. Women telling me what dress I should wear because it might make people look less. Employers deciding what I can handle before I touch the work. Martin Sutter looked at me for 10 seconds and decided he knew what I was good for. Andrew's face changed. She kept going. I won't trade one kind of humiliation for another just because yours comes wrapped in concern. That's not fair, no? No. His hand closed around the back of a chair. I'm not ashamed of you, Nora. She held his eyes. I know. That surprised him. Then she said, I'm afraid you're ashamed of needing me anywhere except where you can control the risk. The chair creaked under his hand. For a moment, he said nothing. Outside, a horse stamped near the hitching rail. The kitchen stove ticked softly. Andrew looked toward the window. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. I'm scared something will happen to you. Nora's breath caught. He did not look away. I'm scared I'll take you into town, and Fitch will realize you're the one who found this. I'm scared he'll decide you know too much. I'm scared something will happen that I can't fix because I was too stubborn to leave you out of it. There it was. No anger, no authority, just fear. It made Nora's own anger harder to hold, but not impossible. She set the towel down. Then why has everyone on this ranch asked me to stay except you? Andrew stared at her. The question landed harder than any accusation. Nora waited. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. She felt something inside her settle. Not break, settle. Like a door closing carefully because slamming it would take too much strength. That's what I thought. Nora. She walked past him. He turned. Wait. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, but did not look back. Andrew's voice was quieter now. I don't know how to answer that. You could try. Silence. Behind her, the old floorboards gave one soft pop from the stove heat. Andrew finally said, The last woman I asked to stay told me this place was killing her. Nora turned then. His eyes were on the floor. Rebecca? Joel had told her enough. Andrew nodded once. I asked her to give Ironwood time. Asked her to stay through winter. She did. His mouth tightened. By spring, she hated the ranch and nearly hated me with it. Nora said nothing. So I stopped asking. That was 8 years ago. I know. I'm not Rebecca. I know that too. Then why are you letting her answer for me? Andrew looked up. That struck. Nora could see it. He had no defense ready. No practical reply. No ranch logic. She waited anyway. Nothing. Her hand closed around the stair rail. Go see Barrett. Nora, go. She climbed the stairs. This time he did not stop her. In her room, Nora shut the door and stood beside the bed. Her trunk sat beneath the window. Closed. For now. She sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at it. Downstairs, Andrew's boots crossed the hall. The front door opened, then closed. A minute later, she heard his horse leave the yard. The sound faded toward the east road. The house became very quiet. By noon, Nora had returned to work. She peeled potatoes, checked flour, turned the last jars of apple butter in the cellar. She did everything she normally did, only more carefully, as if one mistake might make the morning real. Joel came into the pantry near 2. He took one look at her and reached for a sack of beans that did not need moving. Andrew headed to town? Yes. Alone? Yes. Joel nodded. He shifted the sack 3 inches. He shouldn't have said whatever he said. Nora looked at him. You don't even know what he said. I know Andrew. That almost made her smile. Almost. Joel rested both hands on the table. He spent years learning how not to ask for anything he couldn't replace. Nora returned to sorting onions. I'm not interested in being something he can replace. I don't think you are. Then he should be the one to figure that out. Joel accepted that. He left without trying to soften it. Andrew returned after dark. Nora heard him come in while she was washing the last supper plates. He removed his coat, set his hat down. For a moment, neither spoke. Barrett denies knowing anything, he said. Nora kept washing. Did he show you his records? Some. And? They match Fitch's receipts. She turned. So either Barrett is involved or Fitch has been feeding him the same false numbers. That's how I see it. Andrew reached into his coat and laid a folded paper on the table. Barrett agreed to meet again in 2 days with his full purchase book. Nora dried her hands. Good. Andrew stood there, waiting for something. She did not give it. He looked toward the stairs, then back at her. I should have asked what you wanted before I told you what you were going to do. Nora's eyes lifted. It was not the apology she had been waiting for, but it was real. I would have gone with you. I know, and I still think I should have. I know. Another pause. Andrew nodded. Next time, I ask. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Next time, I answer. Something in his shoulders loosened. Only a little. But the question he had not answered was still there between them. Why had everyone asked her to stay except him? Neither mentioned it again that night. Nora went upstairs. Andrew remained alone in the kitchen beside the stove gone cold. And for the first time since she arrived at Ironwood, both of them understood that the danger between them was no longer Raymond Fitch. It was everything Andrew could not bring himself to say. The first real snow came 3 mornings later. Not the dusting that had whitened the high ridges and vanished by noon. This one settled over Ironwood before dawn, soft at first, then steady enough to cover the yard, the fence rails, the woodpile, and the wagon tracks leading toward Copper Creek. Nora stood at the kitchen window with both hands around a coffee mug. Behind her, Joel opened the back door, looked outside, and sighed. Well, Nora did not turn. Heavy enough? Joel shut the door. Neither of them needed to explain what he meant. Her agreement had been until the first heavy snow. Outside, Andrew crossed the yard toward the barn, shoulders bent against the weather. Snow collected along the brim of his hat and clung to the back of his coat. He looked once toward the house. Nora stepped away from the window before he could see her standing there. After breakfast, she went upstairs. Her trunk waited beneath the window exactly where it had waited since August. She opened it. The hinges gave a small, familiar squeak. 3 months earlier, packing had been simple. There had been so little at Ironwood that belonged to her. Now she had to move slowly through the room. Her winter shawl went in first, then her extra dresses. The worn recipe notebook stayed in her hands longer than anything else. Nora had begun keeping it in the kitchen drawer because reaching for it there had become natural. She had added 6 new pages since arriving. Trail biscuits that held better in cold weather. Joel's preferred apple butter. A stew Wesley claimed could make a lame man walk. She closed the notebook, put it in the trunk. The new wool gloves Andrew had given her lay on the washstand. Nora stared at them, then packed those too. By noon, the trunk was nearly full. She left the lid open. Not because she expected anyone to see it. At least that was what she told herself. Supper was quieter than usual. Wesley tried twice to start a conversation and gave up both times. Andrew sat at his regular place. Nora poured his coffee. He said, "Thank you." She nodded. Nothing else. The following morning was worse. The snow had stopped during the night, leaving the ranch under a pale blue sky so clear it almost hurt to look at. The freight wagon for Copper Creek would leave the next afternoon. Joel had already told Nora he would drive her in. No one mentioned it at breakfast. Spoons touched bowls. The stove crackled, A chair leg scraped once across the floor. Wesley stared at his eggs as if they had personally offended him. Joel read the same line of an old newspaper 3 times without turning the page. Andrew drank the coffee Nora had made for him, the same way she had made it every morning. Black. No sugar. Hot enough that he always waited until the second minute before taking the first real swallow. Nora knew that. She hated that she knew that. Andrew set the mug down. Joel says the East Road should be passable tomorrow. Nora folded a napkin. So I heard. If the weather holds, it looks clear. Yes. That was the whole conversation. Andrew left for the barn. Nora watched the door close behind him. Wesley looked up from his plate. That's it? Joel kicked him beneath the table. Wesley winced. What? Nora stood. I have bread to start. She carried the dishes to the basin. No one said another word. Later that morning, Andrew went upstairs looking for a spare blanket Joel said had been stored in the hall cupboard. He never reached the cupboard. Nora's bedroom door stood open. The trunk sat beside the bed. Packed. Lid closed. A folded traveling coat rested on top. Andrew stopped. Nora was downstairs. He could hear her moving in the kitchen. A pan against the stove. The pantry door. Her footsteps. He stood there long enough for the silence to become something with weight. Then he went downstairs. Nora was cutting onions. She heard him enter. Her knife slowed. Andrew stood near the doorway. He looked as though he had come there with a purpose. Nora waited. His eyes moved to her face, then to the cutting board, then back again. Joel, know what time you want to leave tomorrow? There it was. Not stay. Leave. Nora resumed cutting. After breakfast is fine. Andrew nodded once. All right. He walked out. The knife struck the board harder than necessary. That afternoon, Nora cleaned the pantry shelves for the last time. She labeled 2 sacks of beans, wrote the date on 3 jars of preserved apples, left instructions beside the stove about which smoked meat should be used first. Wesley found the paper. You don't have to do that. Someone does. We'll manage. I'm sure you will. He leaned against the pantry frame. His leg had healed enough that only a slight stiffness remained. Nora. She looked at him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he said, I'm glad Joel hired you. Nora smiled faintly. So am I. Wesley looked toward the back door. Some of us are worse at saying things than others. That's not my problem to solve. No, ma'am. He pushed away from the doorframe. For what it's worth, I'd ask you to stay. Her smile faded. I know. Night came early. Snow reflected moonlight through the kitchen windows, making the yard brighter than it should have been. Nora had just banked the stove when the barn bell rang. Once, then again. Fast. She froze. Joel's voice came from outside. Andrew! A door slammed. Boots crossed the porch. Nora grabbed her shawl and followed. The cold hit hard enough to take her breath. Men were running toward the lower pasture. Andrew reached the east gate first. It stood open. Not broken. Open. The chain hung loose from one post. Beyond it, tracks cut through the snow toward Willow Fork. Joel crouched beside the gate. Breeding cows. How many? Andrew asked. Wesley came up behind them, breathing hard. 7 missing. Maybe 8. Andrew's face went flat. Anybody leave this gate open? No one answered. Nora stared at the chain. She had passed that gate before supper while carrying scraps to the hog pen. She remembered closing it. She remembered because the latch had stuck from ice. Joel bent lower. Something pale showed in the snow beside the post. He picked it up. A strip of cloth. Brown cotton. Nora's stomach tightened. Joel looked at her. The cloth matched the torn edge of the work apron she had worn that afternoon. Wesley frowned. That doesn't mean anything. Andrew took the strip from Joel. Nora stepped closer. I didn't leave the gate open. No one accused her. That almost made it worse. Andrew looked toward the tracks running east through the snow, then at the cloth in his hand. Nora's voice stayed steady. I closed it. I believe you, Andrew said. No hesitation. None. Joel looked again at the snow. Then somebody wants us to think she didn't. The cold seemed to deepen. Nora looked toward Willow Fork, where the tracks disappeared into the dark. Her trunk was packed upstairs. Her wages were ready. By tomorrow afternoon, she was supposed to be gone, and suddenly someone had chosen the final night before her departure to make it look as though Ironwood had lost valuable cattle because of her. Andrew closed his fist around the scrap of brown cloth. Nobody rides alone tonight. His eyes found Nora's. The silence between them had changed again. Whatever had opened that gate knew she was leaving, and whoever it was had just made sure she could no longer walk away from Ironwood without looking back. By first light, the yard was alive. Men checked saddles beneath a sky the color of tin. Joel studied tracks beyond the east gate, while Wesley counted the remaining breeding stock twice. Andrew stood near the fence with the strip of Nora's apron folded in one hand. Nora came down from the house wearing her heavy coat and the wool gloves Andrew had given her. Her trunk was still packed upstairs. Nobody mentioned it. Joel straightened from the snow. Tracks head toward Willow Fork. Andrew looked east. Fresh? Fresh enough. Snow stopped before midnight. Nora stepped closer. How many animals? 7 for certain, Wesley said. 8 if the red cow with the split ear went too. Nora frowned. 7. The number caught somewhere in her mind. She looked at Andrew. The receipts. What? The shortages. They went inside. The ledgers still sat stacked on the kitchen table from the work they had done days earlier. Nora opened her notebook and found the figures she had copied before Andrew rode to Barrett. 5, 7, 4, 9. Then another 7 on a later transaction. She ran her finger down the page. Here. Andrew leaned over. Nora pointed. One of Fitch's receipts is 7 head short. Joel removed his hat. Coincidence? No. Nora looked toward the window. Not with my apron at the gate. Andrew's expression hardened. If Fitch knows you've been working those books, he knows. How? Nora thought. Barrett. Andrew shook his head. Barrett wouldn't have told him. You asked Barrett questions. Barrett asked Fitch for records. Fitch doesn't need to be a genius to know somebody noticed. Andrew looked at the copied figures. The kitchen went still. Nora said, he opened that gate because he wanted the missing cattle to look like my mistake, or wanted us looking at you while he moved them. Joel nodded slowly. Willow Fork. Andrew looked at him. Why there? Old holding pen east of the creek. Used to gather range cattle before the north road shifted. Nobody uses it now. Wesley appeared in the doorway. I know the place. Andrew grabbed his hat. Joel, saddle 3 horses. Nora stood. 4. Andrew turned. No. The word came automatically. She saw him realize it. His face changed. For a second, the argument from 2 days earlier stood between them again. Then Andrew stopped. Actually stopped. He looked at Nora instead of the door. What do you want to do? The question was simple. It landed harder than an order would have. Nora glanced at the figures, then at the strip of apron cloth on the table. I want to go. Andrew's jaw tightened, but he nodded. All right. No protest. No lecture. Just acceptance. 20 minutes later, 4 horses moved east through the snow. Joel led. Wesley followed despite the stiffness still left in his injured leg. Nora rode a steady chestnut mare with a short stride and more sense than speed. Andrew stayed close enough to watch her without pretending he wasn't. The road toward Willow Fork narrowed beyond the lower pasture. Snow lay shallow beneath the cottonwoods, deeper where wind had pushed it against brush. Their horses' breath smoked in the cold. For the first hour, nobody spoke much. At the creek crossing, Joel dismounted and examined hoof prints. 7 cattle. Andrew looked toward the north bank. And 2 horses. Wesley frowned. 2 riders? Looks like. Nora felt the cold differently after that. Not on her skin. Lower. Andrew noticed. You all right? Yes. He looked at her a moment longer. This time he did not tell her to turn back. They rode on. Near noon, the abandoned holding pen appeared between stands of bare cottonwood and low willow. The structure was worse than Nora expected. A sagging rail fence, a roofless shed, one gate hanging crooked from a hinge. Cattle stood packed inside the pen, uneasy and steaming in the cold. 7 of them. Ironwood brands showed black against their winter coats. Joel whispered, "There they are." Andrew raised one hand. Everyone stopped. A horse stood tied behind the old shed. Then a man stepped out. Raymond Fitch. Nora had seen him only once before at a distance in Copper Creek. He was lean, clean-shaven, and dressed better than most rangemen. Brown coat, dark gloves, hat with a narrow leather band. Nothing about him looked desperate. That made him worse. Fitch saw Andrew first, then Joel, then Wesley, then Nora. His face changed, only slightly, but she caught it. "So," he said, "McKenna." Andrew stayed mounted. Those cattle belonged to Ironwood. Fitch glanced toward the pen, found them wandering. Behind a closed holding gate, they were headed this direction. Joel dismounted. "Funny thing, so were the tracks from our east pasture." Fitch's eyes sharpened. Andrew swung down from his horse. Nora followed a moment later. Andrew looked at her but said nothing. Her choice. He was honoring it. Fitch noticed that too. "Didn't expect you to bring the cook?" Nora took off one glove. "Didn't expect you to steal exactly 7 head." The silence that followed was immediate. Fitch's gaze went to her. "What did you say?" Nora stepped closer. 7. Andrew watched him. "One of your summer receipts is 7 head short." Fitch smiled. "Paper mistakes happen." "Again and again?" The smile thinned. "You've been looking through Barrett's records?" "Through Ironwood's." "Same difference." "No," Nora said. "That's the problem." Joel moved toward the cattle. Fitch lifted a hand. "Wouldn't touch that gate." Andrew's voice went cold. "Why?" Fitch looked at him. "Because you're standing on land Barrett's men use for temporary holding. Not with my cattle." A second man emerged from behind the shed. Nora had not seen him before. Older than Fitch. Nervous. He avoided everyone's eyes. Andrew's shoulders went rigid. "Who's that?" Fitch ignored the question. Nora's gaze moved to the shed. The door behind Fitch stood open. Inside, papers lay on a crate. A tally book. Loose sheets. A pencil. Something in her stomach tightened. He had been working here. Not just hiding cattle. Recording them. Andrew. He followed her eyes. Fitch moved too late. Joel stepped between him and the shed. Wesley came around the other side. Andrew walked in. Fitch's smile disappeared. "You don't have the right." Andrew lifted the tally book. "Interesting time to get particular." He handed it to Nora. She opened it. The first page meant nothing. Then the second. Numbers, brands, dates, Barrett's transactions, Ironwood. Other ranches too. Different counts. 2 columns. One for what had actually moved. Another for what Barrett had been told. Nora turned another page. Her pulse quickened. "This isn't just Ironwood." Andrew looked at her. "No? He's been shaving cattle off other shipments." Fitch's face had gone still. Joel said, "Pocketing the difference?" Nora nodded. "Looks like it." The older man near the shed took one step backward. Fitch snapped, "Stay where you are." That told them enough. Andrew looked at him. "Barrett, no." Fitch said nothing. Nora kept reading. The pattern was clearer now. Cattle undercounted at delivery. Some diverted, some resold. Small numbers. Repeated often. Enough to hide. Enough to grow. Nora looked at Fitch. "You've been stealing from Barrett, too." His eyes changed. The polite mask fell away. Not dramatically. Just enough. And for the first time, Nora understood why someone had planted her apron cloth at the gate. Fitch wasn't trying to embarrass her. He was trying to discredit the one person who could read his pattern. His gaze dropped to her coat pocket. "Where are your copies?" Andrew shifted instantly. Nora noticed. So did Fitch. "Copies?" Joel asked. Nora kept her eyes on Fitch. "I wrote the original figures down before Andrew went to Barrett." Fitch took one slow breath. Andrew stepped closer to Nora. Not in front of her. Beside her. Fitch looked between them. "Hand them over." "No." "You don't understand what you're interfering with." Nora folded the tally book closed. "I understand subtraction." Wesley nearly smiled despite the cold. Fitch didn't. His right hand moved toward his coat. Andrew's voice dropped. "Don't." Everything stopped. Snow slipped from a cottonwood branch and landed softly behind them. Fitch's eyes stayed on Nora, then on the pocket where he believed her copied figures might be. The harmless cook had become the one witness who could connect his false receipts to the missing cattle. And Raymond Fitch finally understood that Nora Whitfield was no longer standing at the edge of his scheme. She was standing in the middle of it. His hand moved inside his coat. Andrew moved at the same time. Not fast enough to look reckless, just enough to put himself half a step closer to Nora. Fitch drew the revolver. The older man beside the shed backed away so quickly his boot slipped in the snow. Joel froze near the pen gate. Wesley stood several yards to the left, his injured leg stiff beneath him. Nobody spoke. The cattle shifted behind the rails. Their breath rose white into the cold. Fitch pointed the revolver toward Andrew. "Set the book down." Andrew did not move. "You're making this worse." "For who?" "For everybody." Fitch's voice had lost its smoothness. Nora looked at the revolver, then at Andrew. He was too large to hide behind anything in that yard. Too broad. Too easy to see. For the first time, the thing that made him seem almost impossible to threaten worked against him. Fitch knew it too. "Book," he said again. Nora still held it. Andrew's eyes flicked toward her. Not an order. A warning. Nora understood. She slowly lowered the tally book toward the crate. Fitch watched her. That was when she heard leather strain behind him. His horse. The animal was tied near the holding pen and had been uneasy since they arrived. Its ears were flat. One rein had wrapped partly around the hitch rail, and every time the cattle pressed together, the horse pulled backward. Nora looked at the gate. The latch was barely holding. Old wood. One lifted bar. One frightened horse. She did not think about bravery. She thought about timing. Fitch took one step toward Andrew. "Now the copies." Nora said, "They're not here." His eyes snapped to her. "You're lying." "No." Fitch turned the revolver slightly. That was enough. Nora reached behind her and pulled the loose holding gate bar free. The gate swung. The cattle surged toward the opening. Not a stampede, but fast enough. 7 heavy bodies crowded through, hooves breaking the crusted snow and rattling the old rails. Fitch's horse jerked backward. The hitch rail snapped loose on one end. The animal lunged sideways. Fitch turned instinctively. His gun hand moved with him. Andrew crossed the distance in 2 strides. He struck Fitch's wrist away from the line of fire and drove him into the side of the shed. The revolver fell into the snow. Joel kicked it away. The older man ran 3 steps and stopped when Wesley raised both hands and said, "Don't." The man obeyed. Fitch struggled once. Andrew pinned him against the wall. "Enough." Something in Andrew's voice ended it. Not rage. Certainty. Fitch stopped fighting. The whole yard went strangely quiet. Only the cattle moved beyond the pen, confused but not far gone. Joel picked up the revolver and emptied the cylinder before placing it in his coat pocket. Wesley exhaled. That could have gone better. Nora looked at him. Could have gone worse. Andrew turned. His eyes found her immediately. He crossed the yard. "Are you hurt?" "No." "You sure?" "Yes." His hands lifted as though he meant to check her shoulders, then stopped before touching her. Nora saw the restraint. "I'm fine." Andrew let out a slow breath. Then he looked at the open gate. "You did that?" "Yes." "On purpose?" Nora raised an eyebrow. No, Andrew. I thought the cattle needed air. For 1 second, he simply stared at her. Then, despite everything, he laughed. Joel shook his head. Good. Everybody's lost their minds. They tied Fitch's hands with a length of soft rope from the shed and secured the second man separately. The older man began talking almost immediately. His name was Henry Doyle. He had worked temporary cattle jobs for Fitch and claimed he had never understood the full scheme. Fitch told him to shut up. Henry talked faster. By the time Joel recovered the scattered papers from inside the shed, they knew enough to take everyone back to Copper Creek. Nora helped gather the loose sheets before the wind could bury them. One had landed beneath the cattle rail. Another had blown toward the creek. Several were wet along the edges, but the numbers remained readable. She found 3 pages showing Ironwood's actual counts beside lower counts recorded for Barrett. She folded them carefully inside the tally book. Andrew watched her do it. You still have your copies? At Ironwood. Where? Nora looked at him. I'm not telling you. His mouth almost moved. Fair. They reached Copper Creek after dark. Sheriff Amos Turner came from his office wearing suspenders beneath an unbuttoned coat, clearly unhappy about being dragged into the cold, until he saw Fitch tied to a horse and Andrew carrying the revolver by the barrel. That woke him up. Inside the sheriff's office, a coal stove burned too hot. Fitch sat in a wooden chair near the wall. Henry Doyle sat farther away and kept looking at the door. Nora laid the recovered papers on Turner's desk. The sheriff read slowly. Then again. You saying these are cattle tallies? 2 sets, Andrew said. 1 true, 1 altered. Turner looked at Fitch. Fitch said nothing. The sheriff rubbed his mustache. Where's Barrett? Probably home, Joel said. Not anymore. Turner sent a deputy. Louis Barrett arrived close to 10 that night. He was still wearing the dark wool coat he used for business, his silver hair damp with snow. He looked first at Fitch, then at Andrew, then at Nora. What happened? Andrew pointed to the desk. Your agent's been stealing from both of us. Barrett's face hardened. That's a serious thing to say. Nora pushed the first paper toward him. Then don't listen to us. Read. Barrett did. He compared the figures, asked Turner for another page, then another. His expression changed by degrees. Not shock. Recognition. The kind that hurts more. I trusted you, Barrett said quietly. Fitch finally looked up. You made enough. Barrett stared at him. That isn't an answer. Fitch gave a bitter smile. It's the only one you get. Barrett looked away. The sheriff asked questions until nearly midnight. Dates, shipments, who signed what, which cattle went where. Nora answered only what she knew. Andrew did the same. No one embellished. No one needed to. The paper trail was enough. By the end, Turner locked Fitch in the back room and told Henry Doyle he was not leaving town until the matter was settled. Barrett stood near the stove with his hat in both hands. Ironwood's account will be corrected. Andrew looked at him. All of it? Every head we can document. Barrett glanced toward Nora. And judging by these copies, that will be most of them. Nora nodded. Barrett hesitated, then said, You have a good eye. Nora looked at him. For cattle? For numbers. She almost smiled. Numbers are quieter. They rode home after midnight. Snow had begun again, light and dry. Nobody talked much. The danger was over. At least that danger. By the time Ironwood came into view, a faint line of dawn had appeared behind the eastern hills. Andrew rode beside Nora. You saved that evidence. We all did. You found it. So did you. Once I showed you where to look. He shook his head. Still arguing. Still wrong. That earned another faint smile. For a while, they rode in silence. Then Andrew said, I'm glad you're all right. Nora looked at him. He was watching the road. I know. Something softened between them. Not enough, but something. They entered the ranch yard just after sunrise. Joel rode toward the barn. Wesley went to help with the recovered cattle. Nora dismounted slowly, exhausted enough that her boots felt too heavy. Andrew followed her toward the house. For the first time in weeks, the ranch seemed safe. The accounts would be corrected. Fitch was in custody. Ironwood had survived. Andrew opened the front door, then stopped. Nora's trunk sat beside it, packed, her traveling coat folded on top. The sight of it seemed to empty the room. Andrew looked at the trunk, then at Nora. "You moved it down. Yesterday." He stared at her. Nora took off her gloves. "The freight wagon leaves this afternoon." Andrew's face went still. "But Fitch wasn't why I was leaving." The words landed quietly. That made them worse. Andrew looked toward the kitchen, toward the table, toward everything she had helped hold together. Then back to the trunk. For one terrible moment, Nora saw that he had believed saving the ranch would also save whatever existed between them. It hadn't. She walked past him. Andrew remained beside the door. Ironwood had its cattle back. Its books were clean. Its enemy had been exposed. And Nora Whitfield was still leaving. The house remained quiet for most of the morning. Joel took the freight wagon around to the side yard and checked the harness twice. Wesley found reasons to move between the barn and the porch without accomplishing much of anything. No one asked Nora if she had changed her mind. Andrew did not come into the kitchen. That was the worst part. Nora packed the last of her things after breakfast. Her mother's recipe notebook, the wool gloves, the brown work apron with the torn strip missing from one corner. She folded everything carefully, as if neatness could make departure simple. It could not. At 11, she carried the final bag downstairs. Her trunk still waited beside the front door. Andrew stood near the window. He had changed out of his snow-wet coat, but not his expression. Nora set the bag on top of the trunk. "Joel says the road is clear enough?" Andrew nodded. "Should be." She waited. He looked at the trunk, then at her. "Why?" The word came so quietly she almost missed it. "Why what? Why are you still leaving?" Nora looked toward the kitchen. The stove was warm. Coffee sat in the pot. Her jars lined the pantry shelves. Everything she had touched seemed to be asking the same question. She said, "Because the ranch being safe doesn't answer the thing I asked you." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Nora, no. Let me finish." He did. She rested one hand on the trunk lid. "I've spent most of my life being kept around because I was useful." Andrew said nothing. "I can cook. I can stretch $1. I can make enough food for men who come home half-starved. I can mend. I can clean. I can keep accounts. I can sit up with someone who's sick and still get breakfast on the table." Her fingers curled slightly against the leather. "People like that." Andrew's eyes stayed on her. "They like what I can do for them." "That's not—" "It has been." Nora's voice did not rise. That made every word heavier. "I don't want to wake up 20 years from now, wondering whether a man would have wanted me if I stopped being useful." Andrew went still. Nora looked directly at him. "If I couldn't cook another meal, if my hands got stiff, if the garden failed, if I stopped fixing every little thing before anyone else noticed it was broken." She swallowed. "If I was just Nora." The silence stretched. Outside, the wagon harness jingled. A horse blew into the cold. Andrew looked away first. He crossed the room once, stopped near the stove, then turned back. "I thought if I asked you to stay, I'd be asking you to give something up." Nora's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's the part you never understood." He waited. "I get to decide what I'm giving up." Andrew lowered his head. For a moment, the largest man in Copper Creek looked almost uncertain of where to put his hands. Then he walked toward her. Not too close. He stopped with several feet between them. Enough room for a choice. "Nora." She waited. He looked toward the window, the yard, the road beyond it, then back at her. "Stay." That was all. No speech. No promise dressed up bigger than it could honestly be. Just the word. Nora's breath caught. "Because you need to cook? No. Because Joel needs help with the books? No. Because Wesley will poison everybody if I leave? From somewhere outside, Wesley shouted, "I heard that." Neither of them looked toward the door. Andrew almost smiled, then his face settled again. "No." Nora held his gaze. "If I stop fixing everybody's problems?" "Stay. If I stop keeping this house running the way you like it?" "Stay." Her voice softened. "If someday I'm simply me?" Andrew took one slow breath. "That's who I'm asking." Nora looked at him for a long time, then at the trunk, then back at the man who had spent months refusing to ask for the one thing he wanted most. She reached for the handle. Andrew's face fell for half a second. Nora lifted the trunk, then turned away from the door. "Help me get this back upstairs." He stared at her. "Nora, you asked." A sound came out of him that might have been a laugh, might have been relief. He crossed the room and took the heavier end. Together they carried the trunk upstairs, not into Andrew's room, not into any place she had not chosen, back beneath her own window, exactly where it had been. When they came downstairs, Joel stood by the open front door pretending he had not been watching. Wesley made no such effort. "You're staying?" Nora looked at Andrew, then at the men, for now. Wesley grinned. Joel only nodded once, like a man who understood that some victories should not be crowded. That evening, nothing dramatic happened. Nora made supper. Andrew brought in wood. Joel complained about the road. Wesley burned his fingers stealing a biscuit. But something had changed. Andrew no longer stood near the kitchen doorway as though the threshold belonged to him. He knocked lightly on the frame. Nora noticed. So did he. Neither commented. The weeks that followed did not turn into some sudden fairy tale. That would have been easier. Instead, they learned one another slowly. Andrew asked Nora to walk with him after supper. The first time, she made him say the words twice because she thought he meant he needed help checking the south fence. "I mean a walk. With no purpose? That's the idea." "Sounds inefficient," he smiled. "Come anyway." So she did. They walked along the creek while snow cracked beneath their boots. They talked about small things: weather, horses, which men cheated at cards, which apple trees might need pruning in spring. Andrew told her more about Rebecca, eventually. Not enough to turn the past into an excuse, just enough to stop hiding behind it. Nora told him more about her mother, too. Some memories were warm, some were not. Andrew never tried to decide which ones she was allowed to keep. By January, people in Copper Creek had begun to notice that Nora was still at Ironwood. Carolyn Webb came out once with flour and stayed for coffee. Martin Sutter did not come at all. That suited Nora. She began baking more than Ironwood needed. Bread first, then preserves, then apple butter and dried fruitcakes that kept well on winter roads. Joel suggested neighboring ranches would pay. Nora laughed. Andrew did not. He cleared one end of the pantry and built 2 new shelves. When Nora found them, she stood with her hands on her hips. "You could have asked." Andrew looked at the boards. "I thought you'd want them." "I do," he waited. But you could have asked," Andrew nodded. "You're right." The next morning he knocked on the pantry frame. "Would you like another shelf?" Nora looked at him. "Yes." "Where?" She pointed. He built it there. By March, the worst of winter had loosened its grip. Snow still lay in shaded places, but water ran beneath the ice along the creek, and the road to Copper Creek turned soft by afternoon. Nora's little business had begun to make money, not a fortune. But enough. Enough that the coins in the small tin box upstairs belonged to her. Enough that if she wanted to leave, she could. That mattered. One mild morning, Andrew asked her to walk to the front gate. The sky was pale blue. Mud clung to their boots. A meadowlark called somewhere beyond the fence. Nora looked at him. "You've been strange all morning." "Have I? You poured salt into your coffee." Andrew stopped. "I did not." "You did." He looked genuinely offended. Nora smiled. At the gate, he took off his hat. That stopped her smile. He held something small in his palm, a plain gold ring, nothing ornate, nothing showy. "Nora." She looked at the ring, then at him. "I don't need you to stay because Ironwood needs feeding." Her throat tightened. I don't need you because the books need checking. Andrew stepped closer, still leaving room. I want you beside me because this place feels different when you're in it. He swallowed once. And because I do too. Nora looked down at her hands. The hands Martin Sutter had judged before she touched a stove. The hands that had counted flour, splinted Wesley's leg, copied receipts, opened gates, packed trunks. The hands that could work. And one day might not. She had money upstairs, a business of her own, friends in Copper Creek, a road east if she ever wanted it. For the first time, yes did not mean there was nowhere else to go. It meant she was choosing this place, this man, this life. Nora held out her hand. Yes. Andrew closed his eyes for one brief second. Then he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit. Of course it did. He had noticed. Nora laughed softly. You planned that. I've learned to ask questions. About rings? About you. They stood beside the gate while the spring wind moved through the dry grass. No crowd. No church supper. No one to witness it except a pair of horses in the near pasture and the wide Wyoming sky. That suited them. Later that afternoon, a freight wagon rolled east toward Copper Creek. Nora heard it from her bedroom and glanced through the window. Her old traveling trunk sat beneath the sill, closed, unpacked, dust beginning to gather along one brass corner. Months earlier, she would have watched that wagon until it disappeared, wondering whether she ought to be on it. This time, she barely followed it past the cottonwoods. Andrew called her name from downstairs. Nora turned from the window. For years, people had taught her to be grateful whenever she was useful. Ironwood had taught her something different. There was a world of difference between being needed and being wanted. And when Andrew McKenna finally found the courage to ask her to stay, he had done the one thing no one before him ever had. He left the choice entirely to her. So Nora Whitfield stayed. And maybe that is the part worth remembering. Imagine standing where Nora stood, with your belongings packed and the road waiting outside. Imagine loving someone, yet knowing you could not stay simply because you were useful to them. After a lifetime of proving your worth through hard work, would you have been brave enough to ask the question Nora finally asked? Would you still want me if all I had to offer was myself? Andrew had spent his life believing love meant never asking someone to remain. Nora had spent hers believing people only kept her close when they needed something from her. Somehow, on that cold Wyoming ranch, two lonely people learned that love could be something gentler. Not possession, not obligation. A choice made freely and made again each morning. Nora didn't stay because she had nowhere else to go. By spring, she had her own money, her own work, and a road leading straight back to Copper Creek. She stayed because, for once, leaving was possible, and staying was what her heart chose. Maybe that's what gives love its deepest meaning. Not being unable to walk away, but finding someone who gives you room to leave and still makes you want to come home. If you had been standing beside that packed trunk, would you have stayed? Tell me in the comments. And if stories of second chances, quiet courage, and love earned slowly still have a place in your heart, subscribe and stay with us. There are many more journeys waiting beyond the next ridge.